Welcome to the Fighting on Film podcast, the podcast all about classic and obscure war movies, from the Normandy landings to the days of chivalry and swords. If it's been captured on film, we're going to try and cover it. I'm Robbie of RM Military History.
I'm Matthew Moss of Historical Firearms and the Armourer's Bench.
Welcome back once more to the FOF Pod, everybody. Today we have yet another special guest joining us. We welcome historian and Khaki Malarkey podcaster host Olivia Smith onto the show. Olivia, we're so pleased to have you here.
Oh,
Welcome.
Hi guys, I'm very excited to be here.
So we are going to be talking about 2014's Testament of Youth. It is based in the Great War, First World War, whatever parlance you use. So I think we'll rattle through the cast, we'll do production, then we'll get into the meat of it. So Matt, would you like to go through cast a little bit for us quick?
Sure. So I suppose the most important character of all is Vera Brittain, our titular character, played by Alicia Vikander, who I thought was rather good in this. She does really well, considering she's Swedish, I believe.
You can hear twangs of her accent, though, at certain points, can't you?
There's a little bit where she shouts "Daddy" when they're in the train station, and you think,
Yeah.
not quite, yeah. But she does really well. A little bit of production jumping ahead. The character could have been played by Saoirse Ronan. Would have been interesting.
Conflicted with Brooklyn at the time, wasn't it?
I think it's a really strong cast. You've got Kit Harrington as Roland Layton, Colin Morgan as Victor Richardson, who does a really good job in this, I think.
Come a long way since Merlin, yeah.
Yeah, that's very true. Taron Egerton as Edward Brittain, Vera's brother. Dominic West as Mr. Brittain, the father. You have Emily Watson as their mother. Joanna Scanlon as Aunt Belle, who has like a almost comedic sort of matronly little role in there. And then we have the brilliant Hayley Atwell, who plays Hope, who's a veteran nurse.
Yeah, she's great.
At a Tapler. And then we have Jonathan Bailey as Geoffrey Thurlow, who comes in towards the end.
It's a great cast.
Miranda Richardson as well.
Yes, as is it the housemaster at Oxford? Miss Lorimer.
It's just a really strong ensemble cast, and you've got Taron Egerton's making his cinematic debut in it. You've got, Kit Harrington cut his teeth on Warhorse at the time. He's astronomically famous for Game of Thrones and still is. A great ensemble of really, really strong British actors. Criminal underuse of Emily Watson and Dominic West, but when they have to do the emotional punch, they really do bring it. And I think that's why that cast is just so strong.
Yeah, it's almost in that vein of sort of like classic British character movies where the whole cast is, like a solid character actor background, and they do like a really good job within the confines of what they have to work with.
I think that's what you really needed for this film, though. It had to be so character strong, because really that is the essence of the film, and the rest of it is just the context to their kind of stories, isn't it?
Yeah.
So to go through production a little bit, it's a big screen adaptation of Vera's memoirs, Testament of Youth, astronomically really famous book, reprinted hundreds of times probably by now. Originally, it was a mini-series done by the BBC in 1979, and it was produced by BBC Films and Heyday Films. They're known for, Heyday's known for producing the Harry Potter movies and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood more recently. It's directed by James Kent, and the budget is $10 million, and it makes just around half that, 5.3. Could be regarded as a bit of a flop money-wise, but critically it did really well.
It passed me by when it first came out. I didn't
it did to
pick
me
up on
as
it
well.
that it was even in cinemas, so perhaps the sort of promotion around it didn't.
I don't think it did. The first time I watched it when it was on Netflix. So
right, okay.
It definitely, I was like, oh, this looks interesting.
Totally.
And had no clue about it before.
I watched it, I think maybe 4 months ago when it was on iPlayer. I think it was on BBC Two, and it came up, and I watched it with my partner, and she fell asleep because it was quite late on, but I enjoyed it. I watched the whole thing, and I had never seen it before, and I thought, oh, what's this? It looks like it's a war drama, so I left it on, and I was quite impressed. I mean, I'd heard of Vera Brittain before, but I haven't read the book, to my shame, so...
Yeah, I've not read it either, but obviously heard of it. And I hadn't seen the movie. I didn't even know the movie existed until...
Oh, really?
Yeah, until Olivia expressed an interest over social media to come on the show. And I was like, oh, I've not heard of that one. So I'm the sort of virgin eyes of this one. I've not seen it before. But yeah, as I say, it was filmed in the UK, London, Norfolk Moors. It was filmed on Vera's family estate, I think, as well. And
I didn't know that. That's interesting.
For the trench scenes, as they used Vera's estate as well in Derbyshire, I think it is.
Oh,
somewhere
okay.
out there. Yeah. And the cinematography was by Rob Hardy, who went to do Ex Machina with Alicia Vikander as I think she played the robot in that. I've not seen Ex Machina.
Oh God, no.
It doesn't matter. We're not serious.
I think so. It's been a while since I've seen Ex Machina, but yeah.
Other genres of movies don't count on this pod.
I think the most interesting thing out of the whole production thing is that the script was actually written or adapted from the book by Juliet Tauhidi, I think her name is pronounced, and she did Calendar Girls.
Oh wow!
Back in 2003, and
that's a great film.
Death Comes to Pemberley in 2013. So she's got quite an interesting career. But yeah, Calendar Girls. I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting.
It's quite a leap. This is quite a leap.
It's very
from
different,
Girls.
isn't it?
Mm.
And then the best thing I found from production was Kit Harrington's £3,000 wig. So it was a book written about Testament of Youth and how it affects culture. And the guy who's writing the book, he says Kit Harrington was contractually obliged not to cut his hair, so they had to spend all this money making this wig to make it look like he had a short back and sides.
You couldn't tell though.
You can't tell. Yeah,
that's £3,000 well spent. Definitely.
Yeah, it really was well spent.
That's production, really. I think we should get into the meat of the plot, really, and how we felt about it.
This, yeah,
so much to talk about. Olivia, you're the guest. Please dive in.
I don't know about you guys, and I've rewatching it again. I feel like I watched it with such a critical eye, and I felt like I really honed in on the plot this time.
Welcome to our world, yeah, definitely.
I loved it though. I felt like I was really getting into the nitty gritty of the film, because I did Testament of Youth for my dissertation, and so I watched it countless of times anyway. And if it's on, I'll always watch it. But this time felt different. And obviously, the plot kind of is meant to span over the period of the war from 1914 to 1918, looking at her experience of the war. And I felt there was a lot of attention obviously given from 1914 to 15. Pretty much I'd say half the film is that. I felt it was quite slow actually watching it again and realizing they have to build these characters up. They have to build Vera's determination of wanting to go to Oxford, how she's a defiant young woman, and her kind of key relationships are the ones that she kind of maintains at home that Edward brings. So that is introducing her to Roland and to Victor, and how she then establishes a life with war. I found that was kind of an interesting bit in the plot, and it builds slowly. I thought it was really interesting. She's in Oxford. I don't want to obviously give too much away for people to watch it, but I've seen many people have.
Oh no, it's fine. Go in as much depth as you want.
So there she is. She's in Oxford, and the one thing
there's going to have to be spoilers.
Yes, because we're going to have loads of spoilers.
Spoiler for a book that came out in the 30s. Everyone,
If you've not read the book by now, that's not our fault.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But I find they kind of trickled in the fact that it was then war, with the newspapers. I would wonder if you guys picked up on that. It was little subtleties of when her and Roland, chaperoned by the aunt, were in London. Then she puts the newspaper down. It said Britain at war, and it's they've declared war, and then another one. It's just kind of little signifiers, because you didn't really know at what point.
Yeah, I
if
found
you don't know
that jarring.
The story, you don't know. Did you?
Yeah, it really jarred me, because I'm I First World War really bad, like we probably will do, here that today, but it jarred me a little bit, because I was like, where are we then? It was okay. Franz Ferdinand's been shot. That
was a given.
Exactly.
Wasn't it?
That's before the war starts. Then by the time that Roland's dead, I'm like, what is it? Is it 1918?
15.
Is it what year is it? It could be any year.
Yeah, they didn't
say. And then when she goes to Et Apples, it decides to have a title card saying, it's 1917 Et Apples.
1917, exactly.
And I'm sitting there going, well, the context is really important, because these are real men that died. They're not fictional characters. They were real men. They at least deserve the time stamping of their death, because I think it's a little bit unfair on them, really. They're sort of
completely.
At times, Kit Harrington, I think this is. There was a reviewer I was reading. It said it's the best acting role they've seen him in, and I would agree with that. I think he's really good.
He's incredible. I say this from having studied it. I got this weird emotional relationship to Roland and all them lot from studying them so much anyway. And for me, I think he is a perfect Roland. Like from what I've read, you know, there's a book his mum wrote. It's called Boy of My Heart, and it's actually unpublished. But you read that, and to me, then watching how Vera speaks about him, as mum spoke about him, I really feel like Kit captured this kind of like, I can't describe it. I honestly think he's one of the most wonderful characters
he is
on film I've probably watched.
He does bring a lot of weight to that role. Now, he's the most interesting out of the three men, I think, because
but then they all get overshadowed before, because Jeffrey, this is what really annoys me, is Vera had an incredible relationship with Jeffrey. You know, he was a religious man, wanted to go join the cloth, but he didn't, ended up in the army, and he was very good friends with Edward. There's a lot of speculation on him and Edward's actual relationship anyway, but she was very, very close to him. And that really annoyed me, because like his death, everything, you don't even really know he died. You have to kind of suss it out. I find that Edward's crying and you're like, oh, Jeffrey's dead. Like, it's not really said about. And again, that follows the chronology. Like, Victor was injured on the Somme, goes blind. He dies in 17. Jeffrey's dies in her ass, and Edward dies in 1918. But that again is put into a space of what I think half an hour.
They rattle through them, don't
really
they?
quick.
I'm like, let
1916's gone.
Yeah,
I think the idea there is it's to give the audience some idea of the impact that it's having on it, because it's hitting it hard each time. And I think the only way that they could get that into the script was by having them all so close to one another. Whereas in reality, that just wasn't the case.
Yeah, it's a good dramatic effect.
There's a lot of that in this film. There's a lot where they've changed things to make sure that it flows in a cinematic way.
Yeah,
you know, so they completely remove any mention of her being in Malta. She was there for what, like 6 to 8 months, a whole year. So that's entirely gone from the plot. You know, wasn't she torpedoed on the way in as well? The ship she was on.
Yeah, I think, she didn't have an easy time out there, obviously, you know.
Exactly.
When you read Testament of Youth, that is a really interesting part of it. And to me, you kind of think, why would they cut this out? But I think, you know, cinematic purposes, but also familiarity, I think, for the viewer, is you recognise the Western Front more when you think of the First World War than you would thinking of Malta. I think you could have a whole film itself on Vera in Malta. Which would serve better rather than they don't even do that
in the 79 version. There isn't a Malta section, I don't think.
I suppose it's an easy part to just remove, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a shame though, because I think the book I was reading, that the chapter about making the movie, that the author does say, you know, it's a budgetary restraint, and he says it would have cut through the more drab parts of the movie that don't quite flow very well. It would have been nice to have maybe, you know, using a sweeping shot of Malta and then getting a set somewhere. It would have been a nice little change for a film that's trying to beat the drum of, oh my God, the First World War was awful. Look what happened to all these young people. They had their lives completely changed forever. It doesn't show the global aspect of it enough.
No, it doesn't. But it hones in on the familiarity. And I think that is what is quite the success of the film, is even have a basic understanding and a basic knowledge of the First World War. The film is very familiar in its imagery, and I think that's a very clever directional style. You know, Roland going off to the front in 1914, you're then left with like all the women at the train station waving them off, and you can just see the images of that. And there's then the scene of him in the trenches, and when the camera pans to all the individual soldiers. So I'm looking at my books now. Oh, there's this one. You know that image of them in Passchendaele? That Jeffrey's pools of gold speech is exact to that.
Yeah, and they do show that. They show that bit of
that. And then there's also that one of that famous image.
Yeah, the sunken lane. Yeah, that one.
So that one of them, the sunken lane, reminded me when the camera pans to Roland and it pans to the next soldier and the next soldier. There was a lot of familiar essences in it. I think for the viewer, if you're watching it and you don't know so much about the war, you're going, well, I understand, because this is exactly how I'm imagining the First World War would have been like.
It's like a greatest hits of the Great War syndrome. And I think some movies are really sort of drunk on it, where you get war horse. It's like, we have to show tanks, we have to show gas, we have to have machine guns and cavalry. Oh my God, war's carnage. And then you get this one where it's just like, we'll try and just show enough to get the iconography. But I think the film is a little bit guilty of not doing enough by those men to show them changing. You know, it would have been nice to have a few more sequences of Roland in the trenches, seeing what he went through, and it's a snapshot glimpse, and it's enough. And you know that they're in their Brodies. I didn't really think they should have been in Brodies. There weren't that many at the front, but possibly they could have had them. It's a really nitpicky little thing.
Oh, in 1915 there weren't, that's for sure.
They had them, but they didn't have enough of.
They didn't in 1915.
Didn't have a lot of them.
I'll tell you that now.
Yeah, not a lot.
Should have been field service caps.
I think so. Yeah.
That is one of those things that you have to hit. It's people instantly recognise that puttees and Brodie tin hat sort of image of the British Tommy in World War One. So if you present a film where everyone's wearing, you know, field service caps, then it doesn't automatically make the audience think of World War One.
Yeah.
So I think again it's hitting those World War One tropes almost.
Definitely.
Those things that spark cultural memory.
Yeah.
And I think that's where that comes in. That's one of the points where it kind of falls down a little bit on the accuracy side in order to hit one of those.
Yeah, there was some awful
marks
going on, like lads with small packs with nothing in and large packs with nothing in. And I'm like, it's a really small thing. And I notice it more because I used to reenact it, and it always used to piss me off when you see someone with like nothing in their small pack. And I'm like, these lads are going off to war in 1914. They'd be laden with kit. They wouldn't just have their 08 webbing on. They'd have like the kit bags and everything else. And it was like enough to be competent, but I wanted a little bit more. And I think it's probably a budgetary restraint.
And also it shows it wasn't a priority.
No, it didn't feel like it.
In the film either. Yeah. You know, they captured the essence of what they wanted to talk about in that one message.
Yeah.
But they weren't too fussed about really expanding on the rest. Whereas, you know, what we really see, and I imagine if someone said like Taff was on the film, he'd make sure that would be all perfect and everyone would be kitted out.
I said that exactly to Rob. Yeah.
It wasn't,
if Taff was on the film, you could tell Taff was not.
I looked at the chap who did the military costuming, Richard Cook. I mean, he didn't do it. It's not an awful job, don't get me wrong. You know, seen 100 times worse. The movie does save up its budget, and I think it saves up the set dressing for that Etapple sequence, which is
it's incredible.
Really great.
That crane shot,
beautiful.
You know, the crane shot. I remember reading about that, and I think he really did want to capture that horror.
It's so Gone with the Wind.
Yeah, like he really wanted to show a scale, a magnitude. You see the physical mud, you've got the death, you've got all the kind of popular connotations of the First World War is just in one shot. The one thing that really has pissed me off about that scene is the Edward bit. So it's not true.
Right.
No.
It's not true at all. Vera did not see Edward when she was in France. The bit where she's like, I will wait for you every Sunday. She did. She waited for him. She wanted the hope that she'd meet him. They never got the chance to. When the letter, he said that he went by Roland's grave, and he was able to because he was in France. But this is again where the kind of chronology mixes up again, because Edward was on the Somme. It's where he got his MC and everything. I think, if I'm correct, he did go over to Passchendaele because he had a year off. So he's at home. He was injured for a year, went back. I think he did the third Ypres and then went over to Italy. So he never had the chance to meet up with Vera, and it's such a dramatic purpose that they made it be like one of the bodies they found was Edward. And that really does get me because it's just not true in the slightest. Whereas a lot of it, I know there's little elements we've said, okay, some webbing or kit bits that aren't completely accurate, but in terms of the story, I find that they try to keep as accurate as possible. And there's even in the script, it's very clever that a lot of the wording is actually what was said in letters. So there's when Victor dies, there's a bit where Edward says to Vera, and she's like, and the sun of that memory never sets. And there's this beautiful letter that he did write, and that's featured in it. And, you know, Roland's kind of, when he said he's going off to front, he's like, I've got this dust and ashes feeling. This is all extracts from the letters. And even the very, very beginning, the first poem that Roland sends, I can never pronounce it, Vilandville, something like that. But it's like, down the long white road we walk together, down between the grey hills and the heather, that lovely one. And when you see Alicia how are we saying it? I say Alicia.
I think it might be Alicia, yeah.
Alicia.
Alicia, yeah.
We know who we're talking about.
Vera.
I think it's Alicia.
Vera. And she holds it, and I haven't actually had the chance to see any of his letters yet. I'm going to Oxford this year, and there's the whole Vera Brittain archive at Oxford, which you can obviously go, and I really want to hold like one of his letters. That's my thing. But when I have seen them, I think what I know Alicia said that during filming is that she had, I think there must have been a copy, because I can't imagine she would have been allowed to have his actual letters maybe in her pocket.
No.
But she said for that emotional kind of purpose, she had them with her. But the signing that they did, which I think is a really interesting prop, is the Roland signing is the exact same as his. And so you can kind of see it. She's lying down on the bed and she's like holding the poem, and you can see like signed off as Roland, and it's exactly his handwriting. So I think those elements are really good, how they wanted to try keep accuracy within the story. And it's very, because obviously that it's so emotive. Everything about these characters is just emotional.
Yeah.
My other bugbear is George Catlin. George Catlin is who she married. The soldier in the film is not who was in the casualty clearing station with Roland. She hunted this man down, and Vera practically stalked him for a year. So you see that scene when she goes to the hospital where he's being there and he tells her the stuff, she wanted to have an answer. I think she really wanted to believe that Roland's last words was something for her.
Yeah.
I think she is kind of romantic in her. Yeah, she really wanted that. And obviously it wasn't. And it was lying on this hillside for 6 days is made me incredibly stiff. That is what Roland said. But she didn't want to believe it. And so she stalked this guy practically for a year after. But in the film, for some reason, they say it's the guy, George Catlin, who she ends up marrying in the 20s. And
that's quite the liberty, that, isn't it?
I don't understand why. And like her daughter, Shelley Williams, was on set a lot and had a lot of like consulting within this film. And I'm thinking, why did Shirley even sit back and go, yeah, that's fine, just say that was my dad, when it wasn't?
It's like a bit too much dramatic license there. I think that if we're talking about bugbears, the one glaring thing that really ticked me and Matt off when we were watching it was the mention of Spanish flu on the train.
You said this to me.
Yeah.
I didn't pick up on that until I watched it again and was like, oh,
yeah,
she says it. The aunt says it when they're sat in the train station and Roland's ill. And I was thinking, but Spanish flu only came about in the 1918, didn't it?
Yeah. And it's really odd.
She specifically says there's influenza ripping through the troops.
Yeah.
At the moment. And it's I mean, there were flus that move through troops because it's a very virulent virus, isn't it? So it might be something else, but the way that it's delivered very much hints at that it's Spanish flu.
It's that Great War Syndrome thing coming through, isn't it? It's that you have to have
They're
something.
trying to hit a mark that they don't need to hit.
It's weird.
No.
And apparently there's a bit where a nurse drops an iPhone. I think it's a mirror. I was looking up goofs, and I watched the sequence a few times, and Vera goes off a duckboard at Apple's, and a nurse sort of has a box of medical accoutrement, whatever, and she sort of swerves by Vera, and something falls out of her pocket. I think it's a mirror, but apparently everyone goes, "Oh, it's an iPhone," and I'm like, I don't think it's an
I
iPhone.
didn't notice that. I couldn't.
Yeah,
point
I
that
feel
out
like
in the film.
surely they would have edited
That's what I thought.
if it was obviously an iPhone.
It just looked like a mirror, but it was weird to see it. Once you see it, I watched it a couple of times, and I was like, yeah, that's weird to keep that in, But can we talk about how good Hayley Atwell is in her 10 minutes on screen?
Oh my God.
How great is
Hope
she?
Milroy. It's brilliant. And when you read the book, and, Hope Milroy is quite iconic in it as well. And especially, I don't know if you noticed when Vera first arrives at a tableau and the nurse is like, oh, you're with Hope Milroy, good luck. And it's not like, good luck being here. It's like, good luck, you're with Hope. She was very much like this. I would say I think they downplayed the character a bit, but I still feel Hayley did an incredible job of making her seem very like high maintenance, uptight, and quite like that type of person. I think if you were working with her, she'd get on your nerves, but you would end up loving her in the end. And Vera does, and I think it was just an incredible portrayal.
It's really great.
Really
very competent.
Yeah,
that's the kind of vibe that you get from her. Is her character, obviously from the book and the letters, is she a veteran of the Boer War? Is that right? Is that her, or is that someone else?
Oh, she might be.
Because there is someone that Vera worked with that was a volunteer nurse during the Boer War.
Yeah.
And I think it was at a tap plant.
I think it might have been her, to be honest.
I just got that vibe.
I can't remember
Hayley
exactly.
Atwell,
but she does give that vibe that she's a knowledgeable nurse. She's commanding this hut. She's head nurse. I don't really know the whole hierarchy within that, but this is her domain.
Put a dressing on that dirty Hun. I like the wordplay of her sequences because it was like she's digging the Germans a little bit, and she's also doing her job, which was just nice. I mean, Hayley Atwell was brilliant. I think she steals those scenes a little bit when she's in them.
I really liked her kind of seems so nonchalant. You know, that Vera's there with this German soldier and he's dying, and she's just revealed that she can actually speak fluent German. And then he dies, and she just kind of gets up in a stool, opens a window, and she's like, "Just let a soul out." You know, got to let the soul out. And I think that was quite like I thought it was very captivating of that scene. I actually kind of was like, yeah, let that soul out. I literally felt there was fresh air going through in that scene. And I think Hayley is the fresh air in that element. She contrasts so well to Vera as well, and I think that's why it works perfectly. If you had someone so similar to Vera, I don't think it would have.
Yeah,
definitely. I think that scene's one of my favorites. I think if they'd had a little more of a Tapler, because one of the things that annoyed me a little bit about the film is we don't really we aren't signposted about where she is. So she goes from a hospital in Britain, and then there's the chaps come home on leave, and then she's at another hospital, and then she's in France.
Yeah, they do. So she starts off in Buxton. She started off at her hospital, but that's not shown in the film. So she starts off at Buxton there, and then she goes to like, I think it's like number, I'm going to probably get it wrong, like I want to say 17 or something, and I think it's in Camberwell, or I don't know.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the London ones.
But she's in London basically, and then she kind of, I think she just go to a couple hospitals. Well, obviously she goes to Malta, then she comes back, then she goes to France, then she comes back. So we don't know that.
Exactly. And in addition to that, the film doesn't even touch on the fact that she resigned and then came back. And the reason they took her back on was because she explained that she'd resigned to look after and marry someone who'd been invalided, but they died, obviously being Victor.
Yeah. Because he dies so quick,
none of that's,
doesn't he?
None of that's really mentioned.
They don't get room to breathe. The chaps don't.
But he's there for a year.
Yeah.
I think it's long. You know, he's injured on the Somme. This kind of happened, and I forget because he died in 1917. So for some reason in my head, I was like, oh yeah, you know, him and Jeffrey were so close. So I was like, actually no, he got injured quite early, and this is what happened to him, and he did die. I can't remember if Vera. I feel like, as you said, she took a time off from nursing. If she was actually there or not when he died. I can't remember that, but I know he died in Brighton because that's where he's buried. That's where his family and stuff are from. So he's the only one of the four who was actually buried in the UK. But again, I think that's overlooked.
It clear how he actually dies either. So he seems fine. He's recovering. He's blinded, obviously, but he seems to be recovering, and then the next minute he's gone.
What must that be? My basic medical knowledge wants to say it's like a brain aneurysm.
Yeah, I think what it was.
Pretty sure it was
a ruptured cerebral abscess. I read somewhere.
Yes, that sounds very familiar.
So something obviously, had been damaged when he was injured, and it took that whole year, and then it killed him, because there's not a lot you can do about that kind of thing, especially not in 1917.
No, yeah.
But the film does not do a very good job of explaining that was what killed him. So the film sort of suggests that he just has gas blindness.
Yeah.
So they could have. There's certain parts of the film that they could have made.
I didn't really notice.
To be fair, a little bit clearer.
Blind. I don't know why I didn't pick up on it.
I think because you'd assume that maybe he'd have all the bandages over, but because you could actually see his eyes, it's like you have to maybe like really listen in. And if like even still, it's not very clearly stated that Victor's blind kind of thing. You don't really see him with the stick or anything that you would naturally associate
I think that's probably why.
With a blind person.
It's so short though, so there's not really much time to explain it. And didn't you say, Rob, that he went and spent time with
the actor,
some troops that had been blinded in action?
there was a charity, I forget the name, in veterans charity, and he worked with them for a while getting the characterization right, and he was blindfolded and treated the same way for a few days so he could get into the character. And then I almost wonder if it's one of these films where there's a lot left on the cutting room floor, and there are a lot more.
There's so much.
Yeah, and there are a lot more sequences with the three chaps, because I think they get done a bit dirty, because I would hope that they would just expanded their roles a little bit after they go off to war, because obviously it's about a movie about the effects of war, not warfare itself. But it would have been nice to just a little bit to see how Roland was changed. That 10-second sequence in the trench for me is just not enough.
No, you need more. I mean, it changed Roland so much that he converts to Catholicism.
Oh, wow.
I mean, like, you know, so Roland, I think this was just before he died, but like he wasn't Catholic before, and they found out after he died that he changed to Catholicism, and it's on his headstone because his cross is obviously larger for the Catholic cross and stuff. And it does, and I think that's one of my other bugbears, but I did like how when he comes back and she sees him, and it wasn't a surprise that he had come home. You know, he come home, I think, one of his first visits, and practically did a tour of England. So they went, Roland's house, and this is my only other another bugbear is that beautiful house on the cliff and everything is not obviously where it was.
Yeah.
I grew up in the house next to where Roland lived. I never knew about it until I read the memoir.
Wow.
And so I'm reading it, and she's like, yeah, we visited. So in 1915, they came up, and they basically came up like here to Suffolk. Then they went over to Leicester. Then they went up to like somewhere else to meet Edward, went over to Buxton. They did and he got influenza then again because it was so much traveling. But that was another kind of bugbear of mine, knowing it was like this, he lives in this beautiful turret house on the cliff. So it's kind of right, but obviously it's not going to be the same here.
That scene feel like it's just a weekend, like a snatched leave,
Yeah,
don't
they do.
Yeah, they do. But him coming back, and he seems so like war torn, and I think another familiarity I think they wanted to maybe show for the viewer is that like element sort of like shell shock. To me, that's how I picked
especially
up
when he
on,
sort
like,
of tumbles her off his shoulder, you know.
That's quite intense.
I really like that.
You know,
I think.
Did you?
Yeah, I thought Kit did a really good job of conveying a damaged man, because he definitely seems a lot different, because he's really chipper before he leaves. I'm leaving tomorrow for the front. You know, he's really keen, to go and do his bit.
Yeah.
It's classic Edwardian young
I won't
gentleman,
let
isn't
other
it?
men
Really?
do my service for me. All that sort of language. I appreciate them putting it in there, because it showed the sort of attitude of young men at that time. And then he does seem different. He's colder. He's a lot more. He doesn't say as much. He seems like he's got the weight of the world on his shoulders. And then you read in his letters that he's sort of trying to play it all down. And I really did like it. And that's why I just wish they'd have just done a bit more with him, because I was like, he's really important.
There's so much more. Oh, there's so much more they could have explored with Roland. Do you know what? The one thing I love so much is his poetry. Like how they really, that is so powerful. Plug Street Wood was not the one that was found in his belongings when they did it. Vera had, I'm pretty sure Vera had that before. It was the poem that was read at the end. That was the one that was in his belongings, though. But I think for dramatic effect, again, Plug Street Wood is just so personal as well. It's like what you mean to me, love and hope and life and you, and how it's all bodied within this kind of imagery of the war. I think again is another familiar aspect for the viewer of poetry, which is so traditional when we understand the First World War. It's kind of an element, I think, that escapes the viewer, in that you think, oh, Roland's so poetic, it's wonderful, but really it's kind of like a familiar nod to like Sassoon or Wilfred Owen and all those other ones that people know as well.
Yeah, I like what they do in the 79 series, where they play over stock footage and pictures. I really found that really powerful. I wish they'd have replicated that in the film a bit more.
Or even showed the guys a bit more of them actually in the trenches.
Just a tiny little bit, because
perhaps him writing it.
That would have been nice.
Thinking
about
him in Plug Street Wood doing it.
Would have been really good, because I watched the behind the scenes still featurette, and Kit Harrington says, "Oh yeah, well they dressed me up in the uniform, and we filmed for about half an hour, and that was my time in the trenches, and wasn't it awful? And for these lads," and I'm thinking, what, you filmed half an hour? Like, come on.
Well, that was his point in that section, though, because they had artificial rain on them, and he was saying like how uncomfortable he was in that half an hour, let alone spending a prolonged time there.
Yeah,
and he makes a point in that
with 38 Webley.
Sorry to steal your point, Rob.
All right,
he makes a point of saying that he felt the weight of portraying someone who is a real person, because he'd never portrayed someone who wasn't a fictional character before.
Of course. Oh, that's interesting, actually. It's kind of nice to hear that from the actor, I think.
Yeah, I think they all seem to do their research into the character a lot, because they all, in that featurette, they all talk about how, it's something that they take for granted in their day-to-day. It was nice for them to go back and portray that, which is always nice to hear from actors in a historical role, when, it's just nice to have that, because you think, okay, you've done your due diligence, you've done some research, you actually
then it's
care.
more than a job.
Yeah, exactly, which is nice. And obviously this comes out in the 100th anniversary of of 1914, the war starting anyway. So it was good. It was a good intentioned film. I like that as well.
I think to me, and this is why I really looked at it in my dissertation, is the fact that this is placed in the context, obviously, of the centenary. And at this point, the war memory is so different to obviously what it would have been in 1918. You know, in 1918, they didn't think of it as like, you know, they were labeling it the Great War still. It wasn't really even called the First World War until the Second World War kicked off. You've got this, I've touched upon it already. It's like, you know, blood, mud, futility, poetry, donkeys, veterans. It has all kind of snowballed from 1918 to now. And what we're left with is this popular dominant narrative of the war. And that film, I think, actually taps into it really well. I mean, Vera's, so obviously the film's based on the memoir, which was written in 1933. So this is a long time after Vera. I think she starts writing it around 28, 29, but even still, it's a good 10 odd years after, and she does use her own wartime diaries. But when you read her wartime diaries, it's so different to the book, because at that point now you've got her pacifist sentiments coming out. You've obviously got her reflection of how war is awful and it's ghastly, and the loss that she faced is just so awful too, which is completely understandable, because it's something I hope none of us today will ever have to experience, and will have to relate to Vera on that point. But then I think the film then uses those popular, as we mentioned before, familiar narratives, and that's what's really honed in on throughout it all. And that's the familiarity, and I think that makes the narrative a real personal level to the modern viewer.
When did she become a pacifist?
Oh, like in the 20s, she joined like the Freedom Peace. Is it the Freedom Peace League?
Union?
Yeah. There's a lot of those going about in the 20s, and she did join some of them in the 30s as well. Obviously, as the Second World War's broke, you know, she was on Hitler's Black Book. That if the Nazis ever invaded the UK, that they were the first people she was going to get, because she was so outspoken against bombing. She was on Hitler's Black Book.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like my grandmother, so she grew up in Hamburg in Nazi Germany. There's a Vera Britain kind of walk and Vera Britain train station named there, because she was so outspoken against the bombing of Hamburg.
Wow.
That when I said to my nanny I was doing this, like looking at Vera Britain, she's like, oh my God, I know this woman, how incredible she is. So her legacy, and to me, I think
by bombing, was that a pamphlet during the war?
I think, yeah, she had the pamphlet, and obviously, you know, she was very outspoken, and rightfully so, from what she'd seen. And I think we get that, you know, what she'd been through, the fact that she can I can't imagine that being a nurse. And I think huge credit to all of anyone who's a nurse or who has to face of death, like that German soldier just dying, and then she's able to pick herself up and just like, deep breath, let's go on to the next one. You think
it takes incredible courage.
Yeah.
Again, it's that's interesting, because the film obviously compacts that into it's just after the war. She runs into George Kaplan.
Yeah. Oh, the speech thing.
Really good.
She did a lot of them. She was not popular at Oxford when she got back. She was not a popular character at all. But she did a lot of those.
Well, I really liked that ending. It was really empowered, and I felt like the characterization came out of her shell a little bit, and she was allowed to sort of be a little bit more than just. It was nice to have anti-war sentiment at the end, and it was also nice to see how, because I don't think I've ever seen it portrayed in film, people having a debate about how the Treaty of Versailles should go down. I think that's quite highbrow for the end of your First World War movie, that you show the audience that people were thinking about how Germany should be punished, and you know, it wasn't just down to politicians. It was a social level. From the top down, everyone had an opinion because everyone had been affected by it. And it was just really nice to see Vera have her moment to be like, I'm going to cement who I am going forward. And I think it was really good, because I thought the movie would just fade out to nothing.
After, because I kind of forgot about that ending bit. And then when obviously they start, that's what I want to notice. Did you guys pick up on the gun sounds at the very beginning?
Yeah.
You know, when they're doing BBC sounds and it's the guns going off in the background.
Yeah, it did sound like artillery going off a little bit.
Yeah, it is artillery going off. And so obviously then when they come to the end of the war again and they've got her, and you're like, oh, okay, surely this is where it ends. but it doesn't. And I really like the fact then you've got her meeting Winifred Holtby, and that's another key. She writes a whole testament of friendship that's dedicated to Winifred. So it was nice they introduced her, I think, and how she was kind of like, spring is coming. And I love that shot of her by the tree and seeing spring is coming, this new life is coming. Because when Vera goes back to Oxford, originally she was studying literature, and when she goes back, and I think the war definitely affected her because she changed her degree completely. She studied history,
right?
And so I always find that very interesting, because I think she wants to like put an understanding to what had happened and to understand the world and everything else. But there she is, so kind of defiant and wanting to speak up. And it did take her a while to set into Oxford. It's quite actually sad reading those parts of her, because you feel for her and you're like, oh God, that must have been... I imagine feeling left out at school is how I felt for her at that point, as she was trying to make her mark and trying to fit in with people. But I like that. And I think, what did you guys think of the kind of closing scene then? Like, I thought it was so powerful. You know, you've got the long white road and it's empty. You've got the rugby pitch at Uppingham, it's empty. Then you could bring her to that pond and it's just her. And I thought it was so powerful. Like, that every time makes me cry.
It was just like the innocence of youth being gone, and how I think that obviously that generation of men and women and everyone who was
the rugby field made me think of the lost generation. And it contrasts nicely with all those scenes that we've seen before of them, men actually playing rugby on those fields and the chaps swimming with her there. So it's all those sort of like a circular sort of closure, isn't it? But
it's all those lost moments, isn't it, of life that you're not going to have anymore. It's not how it. Obviously, it's for those people. They're not going to have it because unfortunately they've been killed. But it's more. I felt how her life and everyone else's life has just been drastically changed, because they just aren't. That's not going to be the same for a while, and then you get another big war like 20 years later, and it's just like, oh my gosh, like we can't fathom that. So it's. To then reiterate it to the audience is just another good thing that the movie does.
I thought the last line and it's always stuck with me, of how, I don't know, I just think whoever wrote that, it's just so powerful. And it's, what was it? It's like, they'll want me to forget you. They'll want me to forget, but I can't, I won't. This is my promise to you, all of you. And I think it taps into obviously our remembrance narrative of how actually we haven't forgot any of them. We won't forget them. And I think really when you reflect on the whole, and I agree actually, and I never really thought of about it, the fact that the guys aren't maybe as justified as they should be in their characters and explored further. Obviously this is all about Vera, but maybe more of them could have come out within the film if it was just maybe even half an hour longer.
Yeah.
But I think it would have made a great miniseries, as the BBC one did, but perhaps, one of these Netflix limited series where they have the budget of a major production, and they can do all of these things that we would like to see, the Malta experiences.
Oh, the Malta was incredible.
More of her in France nursing. I would have loved to have seen exactly, and I would have loved to have seen more of the procedural stuff of what the nurses and the VADs actually were doing, because that's so fascinating in and of itself. Because they all had set duties, and obviously the VADs weren't fully qualified nurses, so the interaction between Royal Army Medical Corps, the actual nurses, and then the volunteer aid detachment nurses, also interesting, could have been brought in, because obviously Vera is the go-to source because she's so eloquent in the way she writes, and there's so much material there from not only from the book itself but also from all of their letters. So there's so much scope to have broadened out this into sort of like a bigger piece, into like a mini series or something like that.
And I still think there's room for more of it as well. There definitely is room for it again. I think it's something that might get revisited. It's got all those beats that everyone enjoys. It's got a little bit of war. It's got a little bit of that love tale in there. It's got that like period costume drama feel to it.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that I think maybe, this is my last big criticism, really, like final thoughts sort of thing, is like, it didn't know what it wanted to be at points. Was it a strict retelling of the love element, or was it trying to fit the war in as well. They almost couldn't pick.
Yeah.
They couldn't pick it at times because it really. There's times I think you could be watching an episode of a BBC period drama, and then there's bits where you could be watching. I forget the name of it. It came out a few years ago now, but that nurses like TV series they did on BBC did like around like 2015.
There was a World War One nurse.
I can't remember its name.
Series, wasn't there?
But it felt like that. Like it felt like a little bit of like, what are you trying to? What are you actually trying to show me here? Like I understand it's part of her story, but it almost needed like two parts. Like this is her life before, this is her life during, this is her life after.
I think they tried that though, and but then I think it was too slow at the start. I think if it was more balanced, because like I said, the whole build up from 1914 to like Roland's death, so that's the end of 1915. He dies on the 23rd of December. So that is such a slow build up. But I think, like you say, they want to show before war's introduced slowly, and then suddenly it's everything in her life. And then it kind of quickens to be like, well, this is all war is, and it's all she really now knows. And then suddenly you got that bit at the end where it's like, okay, and now she's going to adjust to a life without war and without these guys and living with these ghosts. So, I think she feels a lot of war guilt. She did encourage her dad to let Edward sign up, and obviously Edward dies, and that guilt she must have felt. But him being the last one as well, I think, of all four of them to go, I think must have been so hard. And like, do you guys know a bit about how he died too, or the story behind it?
No, I don't.
So he's in the Assaggio Plateau in Italy, and it's just said that he was shot in the head going over the top. But the day before, he had received a court-martial for basically relations with his men because Edward was gay. And Vera writes about it later on in life. There's like a fictional book, and it's basically about Edward. So what they then think is basically someone had found out, and they then suspect that when it came to going over the top, Edward's way out was just to make himself as vulnerable perhaps as possible. And I think there's a huge guilt played into this that's where his character could have been explored more.
That sounds like an important movie in itself, you know.
It is completely.
Yeah.
So important. But like, he was so musically gifted as well, and we only see a bit about that at the start. And like, I think that would have been nice to have touched upon a bit more. I wonder
if that falls down into just writing the role and how they cast it, because obviously Taron Egerton's, it's his on-screen debut, so maybe they didn't want to give him too much just in case. Who knows?
I thought he did brilliant.
Brilliant. Yeah,
I honestly thought Taron.
The casting is fantastic.
I couldn't imagine another Edward for it, because I think he's just so. I don't know, from what I've read about them two, I think I'm like, he is perfect.
Do you want to do like a quick roundup of favourite scenes, perhaps, before we come to a conclusion? What's your favourite scene, Olivia?
Oh my God, it's so hard. I think for me, it has to be the first poem, and how she's kind of remembering it, like, and how he's kind of, you see that they set up the shot before, you see this long white road down between the grey hills and the heather, and you kind of don't tap into it until you're hearing this poem, and then they show it back to you through how she's kind of, her senses are like, that's what I find really interesting, is her sensory kind of imagination to it all. I think I think it's the romantic in me. I really like that kind of romantic first poem, like how beautifully written it was. And quite a sad little note, I've always thought, it goes on a little bit more, but I always thought, if I ever got married, I'd like that be a poem I'd like read at my wedding, because it's very, how he words it is lovely.
What about you, Rob?
Well, for me, I mean, I mentioned it earlier when we were sort of riffing on the plot, but it's in Atwell's or Atwell's in hospital, field hospital. I'll never pronounce it properly. You know, never. Wipers, eep his wipers to the day I die. And
your accent makes it brilliant.
Plug Streetwood. No, but anyway, it's in that scene, it's just brilliant. You know, the set dressing is really nice. I just like the sweeping shots of all the men on the stretchers. It's really evocative of those really famous shots of the war and the dressing stations you see. You know, it could cut in fantastically to the end of 1917. It has that feel. It just shows that horrible sort of, I know it's a bit cliche, but it shows the destruction of the war. You know, there wasn't a war like it before. It hadn't affected men in that way. The men weren't getting wounded in the way they were before the First World War came around, and it just shows it really nicely, you know, and it shows Vera's character development where she, you know, she's really out of her depth for the first time, I think. And we see the shock on her face, especially when Hayley Atwell as Hope is taking her through the dressing station. If you're not aware as a viewer, you get to know that German soldiers were treated in aid stations along with our lads. So it's a nice little tidbit there history wise. But yeah, that's my favorite bit.
Definitely. And I completely agree. I mean, that's cinematically, that's my favorite scene of the whole film. I love the way that we've already been introduced to those couple of huts in the little compound when she arrives, and there's a couple of scenes. So when the wounded start coming in, she's at the front tending to a couple of stretchers, and someone helps walking wounded into one of the huts. And we think, well, that's it. So that's all we're going to see. They're going to cut into a hut, and she's going to be doing some nursing. But then we get that lovely crane shot that we mentioned earlier, and it just goes over the top of the roof. And then we get this big expansive shot, which just seems to keep going and going. And it reminds me so much of that scene from Gone with the Wind, where they're at the railhead and you just got all of the wounded, and it just pulls out and out and out and out. And it's obviously got to be influenced by it. I think Rob Hardy did a lovely job with that scene.
Yeah.
And for all the reasons that Rob mentions, and Alicia or Vera's reaction to that is some of their best acting in the film. She doesn't say a word, but you can see everything that she's thinking on her face from just seeing all of these men riding, you know, in as far as the eye can see.
Yeah.
So I think that was a really powerful scene. I also really liked the scenes with Winifred Holtby, where she's, you know, talking about ghosts and we all have someone.
Yeah, I love that one.
I thought the actress that portrayed her did a really good job. Alexandra Roach, a really great job of.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Oxford.
She did a really great job of sort of being the voice of everyone else.
Yeah.
And helping her come to terms with loss. When you think about it, like, there's a whole generation of parents and sisters, brothers. They're all coming to terms with that loss. So I thought that was I gave voice to that really well. So I like that scene too.
It's really powerful.
Yeah, it's very caring, isn't it? And it's another, I think it works so well because she's another contrasted character to Vera. Vera's so cut off and cold naturally. But Winifred's also gone to France and experienced it as well at Abbeville.
Yeah.
So she's come over and been like, I understand, but I'm here to help you and be your friend and comfort you. And I think that familiarity of just like basically someone putting an arm over you is so powerful.
Yeah. And it's also nice to have a little bit of the late war represented as well. So you've got that spring offensive when they mention, the Germans are getting closer. And it's only a small thing. If you're not aware, then you're not aware of it. But it isn't just nice to have it that, you know, it isn't just 1916 and it isn't just 1914 or Armistice Day. There's a whole swathe of the First World War that never gets any mentioned at all. So
just cut to the end of Journey's End.
Exactly, yeah. So just the fact they mention the Italian front is a triumph as well. So it's just really nice to hear it. But yeah, I mean, what more can you say really? I think we've done a Testament to Youth, a good reviewing.
Yeah, our testament.
That's it, yeah. That's what I was trying to say.
Testament of Reviews.
Yes, Testament of Yes, really good.
I think it's a solid movie, definitely. I think the cast is excellent, and the casting, so the way that they brought those actors together is, you know, very, very good. It's beautifully shot. The script takes some liberties with the source material. Yeah. I think it's fair to say.
It does in every war film, really, when you think about it.
Exactly. There's no perfect film, and I think it captures pretty much what Vera was trying to get across in the book.
Yeah, completely.
And it handles some of the characters really well, to the point where you wish the film was a little longer and had a little more focus on them.
Yeah.
So I think while it's guilty of trying to hit some World War I beats, I don't think it's too much of a detriment to it.
But I think as well, for my sort of parting shots, it's important to have movies within the war movie genre, movies within the genre that aren't just, you know, men being sort of cliche, stereotypical, I'm going to run over a no man's land and bag me a Hun sort of thing. It's nice to have that more grounded representation.
It's a social aspect.
Exactly, of how war affects
It just shows how broad of a genre war movies actually are.
And this is it's important. You know, I know we always say on the pod, like, these movies are the key to further learning.
I think my concluding thoughts on it is that I really think you could go as far as to saying that the film itself is a form of commemoration and remembrance to Vera and to those guys as well.
Agreed.
I think those, as I mentioned, those final words at the end, I think it's so poignant, the fact that they really made sure it's just like, this is my promise to all of you, we will not forget you. And I think that's the kind of message that Vera wanted to hone in. And that's the message I think the directors and everyone else really come away with, that you do have that sense of, crap, we really cannot forget what happened to these guys, but also to the people who lived through it as well.
Agreed. Yeah. And I think on that note, I think we'll wrap up for this week. So, Olivia, thank you very much for coming on. We're really, really excited.
Thank you.
I hear there's rumblings
I'm so excited.
of us maybe coming
I'm so
onto
excited
your
there
podcast.
Is.
Yes.
No, maybe it's happening.
wow.
You're on our schedule.
Look out for that one. We'll make everyone aware on the Twitter.
I can't wait. I love Khaki Malarkey.
Yes, it's a great one. Great pod. Doing a fantastic job.
Oh, no, we've all come together, haven't we?
Yes, of course. And if you haven't listened to any Khaki Malarkey, and this is your warning, go and listen to it now. Go and give them a follow.
So much malarkey.
Like. There's plenty of malarkey, and it's a great name.
So much malarkey.
Yeah. As always, drop the podcast a like, a review, a subscription, whatever you're listening on. Find us on Facebook, Fighting on Film. Find us on Twitter at Fighting on Film, and the website fightingonfilm.com. So this is me and Olivia and Matt saying bye-bye. We'll catch you again in the next one.
Bye, guys.
Bye.